Today is Thursday, September 25th, 2014, and I'm in Stillwater, Oklahoma, interviewing Frances Stromberg about her life and career at OSU as part of the O State Stories Oral History Project. Frances, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for asking me.
Let's begin. Can you tell me the year you were born and where you were born?
Well, my birthday is July 25th, 1922, which means that I am now 92 years old.
And where were you born?
I was born in Glendale, California.
Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about your parents.
Well, my mother was the main person that I hung on to all my life because my father died before I was 3 years old. Now, people say, oh, then you don't remember him. Well, I do remember him because we had moved to Raisin Grape. Thompson, well, back up just a minute. My parents had purchased 10 acres of Thompson grapes up in the San Joaquin Valley, north of LA a bit. And they thought that they were going to be able to make a great living out of that. Well, it just was not a good choice to begin with because my father was an older man. He was the same age as my mother's father. And he and she were trying to do all the work of taking care of 10 acres of grapes that needed to be harvested. And we had been up there since November, and this was just a week or so before my birthday in July when my father died in his sleep. So I remember some of the things that he did because they had a big pit out there where they had some very powerful pumps and pumped water out of an underground river in order to water the grapes. And I remember so clearly hanging my head over the edge of that pit and the lectures that I got, very sweet ones from a loving man. But anyway, and I just worshipped him. That's all it was, as long as I had him around. And I think he worshipped me because I don't think he thought he was ever going to have another little one.
And could you tell me his name?
His name?
Mm-hmm.
Henry.
Okay.
Which was a family name. Mm-hmm. Henry Ireland. My middle name is, I use my maiden name as my middle name now, and that's Ireland. And it's nice because that family came from across the Atlantic Ocean to the America. Mm-hmm. And by the time they got to America, there was one little boy whose either one parent or both parents had died. And the people who were the managers of that boat that he was on didn't know his real name. And all they knew was that the family had gotten on the ship in Ireland, one of the ports in Ireland. So I became Ireland.
What happened to the raisin farm after he passed away?
My mother and I just had to leave it. Mm-hmm. And we were back to visit it a time or two after I was grown up. But I think that she was able to sell it at some kind of a reasonable price.
So tell me a little bit about your mother.
Oh, well, my mother was the big sister in a family of 5, and her mother was very ill all along with what I suspect was liver cancer, because she was in the hospital in Kansas City on several occasions before she passed away. But anyway, Leela, my mother, had to just take over, and she did. She had just younger sister and 3 little brothers. And that whole family loved little folks. And her dream was to become a teacher, and she did. And she has a reputation here in Stillwater among some families who are still living here who had children who started to school too, because my mother was a first grade teacher. And they still tell me what a marvelous first grade teacher she was.
Well, how did your family get from California to this neck of the woods?
Oh, that's an interesting story. But maybe you ought to know about how they got from northeastern Kansas to California first.
Okay, sure.
Because my mother grew up in northeastern Kansas, and she had finished high school while she was taking care of all this little crowd of younger children, and had decided she wasn't going to continue in that way, and she managed somehow or another to get enough money put together that she could go down to Emporia to the State Teachers College, and she finished down there 1 year, and I don't remember the whole story about how many times she had to get back there, but she did get a degree from Emporia and had a teacher certificate that was a lifetime certificate in Kansas, just with whatever degree it was that she had, whatever schooling she had. And so she decided she wasn't going to do anything except teach in a country school. And first year she decided that she got a job selling encyclopedias. And they sent her to Colorado. So she got to Colorado, Greeley area, and somebody, I don't know whether it was with the book company or just somebody she met, said, well, we know a nice place for you to live since you're alone and you'll be coming and going and whatnot. And Mrs. Ireland lives over here. Oh, well, okay, she went over there. Well, Mrs. Ireland had a son. And they were married at the end of the summer. So that's how they got as far as Colorado. Well, the Ireland family was just as clannish as some of the rest of us Scotch-Irish. And they had lived in West Virginia, and they were all, well, they were called contractors, but they were wonderful carpenters. They could build houses and all this kind of thing. And so the newlyweds went to California with all of them who went on to California. The newlyweds went to California with the ones who went on to California that summer. And so they were out there, but then I guess my father decided that what he was asked to build in the neighborhood of Los Angeles didn't suit what he knew how to build, and he better do something else. And that's when he decided to invest in the 10 acres of grapes. Mm-hmm. And of course, you know, all of this just came one after another. And my mother had no other relatives in California other than married, was the family that she married into. And so her sister and her brothers said, you get back here to Kansas and we'll see about you. And all of them were just as dear as they could be about moving over and making room for us. And, you know, I laughed here a while back and said to myself and told somebody that in that situation, as a little girl, I thought everybody in the world loved me. Because everywhere we went, people were so eager to make my mother feel more comfortable and entertain me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the way we got to California and back.
So you went back to Kansas.
Yes, and my mother got a job in Salina.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't remember whether she happened to know this family before she went out there. I'm just not clear about that at this point. But anyway, the man who was the principal or superintendent of schools, whichever it was, in Salina, had a family there, and he offered my mother a place to live. Now that was, I don't know what, I guess they had me there too, come to think of it. But anyway, she taught there, and at that particular year, well, it wasn't right after we came back from California that we ended up in Salina. We did something else for a couple of years. And anyway, the man who was superintendent of schools out there had interviewed my mother, and I guess he saw me too, and invited my mother to live at their house. And she got to be just feeling a member of their family, which she still does, or she would if she were around. And people just kind of took care of each other. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, the man who was superintendent of schools said, "I'm really tired of this job." And he went to Kansas City and went to dental college. So that gets back and straightens things out a little bit. By the time we got back somewhere along the way, before very long, he had finished dental college and had moved down here to Stillwater and established a dental practice. And my mother and his wife had kept writing letters all along. And he wrote to my mother and said, "I'm in Stillwater. I have a good dental practice. I'm a member of the school board. As a matter of fact, I was elected president of the school board last year, and I believe we need a first grade teacher if you would like to come down." And so we liked, and we came down. And we were in Topeka at the time that this offer came, because my mother's only sister lived in Topeka. And so if you want to know how we got here, then we got on a train in Topeka, came to Arkansas City, got off the train at Arkansas City, and on the little doodle bug that came on down here, I think Shawnee, where it ends up down here. And I got a geography tour all the way, see this, see this, see this, all the way down here. But it was not all to the good, because it was a very hot, miserable summer. And it was, of course, late in August when we were coming, and things were so badly burned. Mm-hmm. And it made my mother sick at heart to think that she had been told that this was good corn growing country around here, and all she could see was dried up corn plants along the way. But she said, I've did hear her say many times, when we got off the little doodle bug down here at the train station, which is still the same train station down here, that she said if there'd been another train in that afternoon, we would have been back on the one going north.
What school did she start in? Teaching first grade.
Uh-huh.
What school?
Jefferson.
Jefferson.
That's the only school she ever taught in.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. First grade, Jefferson. And people sold houses and bought houses in Jefferson's district so that their youngster could start school to Mrs. Ireland. Because her reputation kind of spread around the town. And I think that she was happy to have, I think she had, I don't know, sometimes as many 40 first graders in her room. No help. But she persuaded those youngsters to be very good young students in her room. And I know after I was in college and I visited, sometimes I could sit in the coat room and see out into the room when I had to kill a little time for something. And I've heard her call the children up to sit around her in a reading circle and explain to them what the room was like and what it was for, and say that now we don't have desks, we have tables, and we have chairs, and we have a reading circle while some people are working at their desks and or at their tables and all, and we just need to be sure that we don't interrupt each other. We need to be helpful to each other. And you know, those youngsters swallowed that hook, line, and sinker.
Well, when you moved to Stillwater, where did you live?
When
you and your mom moved to Stillwater, where did you live?
Where did we live?
Mm-hmm.
You know where the corner of Miller and Knobloch is? Mm-hmm. Right there.
Describe the house for me.
Well, the first house was a little white house with just regular siding on the side of it, not a very big house, and it faced over onto the campus. And it's the house that, goodness, now I'm going to need help with this, but who is the woman who has written so much about this part of the country, of the state, and lived over around Enid, or her statue is down at the library.
Angie Debo.
All right. Angie Debo lived in that house while she was an undergraduate student. And she had just left before, so that's why the house was available for my mother and me to move into it. And actually we lived in another house over here on Lowry Street that had a basement apartment when we first came. And it was a wet, cold, yucky fall. And I guess I got tonsillitis that I didn't get over the whole winter. So it was close between Thanksgiving and Christmas when we were able to move into that house. And I had never seen the like of a place like that to live, because I had lived when we were in California. Before we came back to Kansas, we had gone out to Banning. I don't know if you know well, if you go almost straight east of Los Angeles, over almost into the middle of California, because it's very close to Palm Springs and all that desert area. And we lived over there for 3 years. And I played outside all winter long, all year long, wore little black sateen shorts and a visor so that the sun wouldn't get in my eyes. And that was all I ever knew. Well, came back to this little house there on Knobloch Street, and they had open gas burner was the only thing, of course, to heat the house at that time. And that has a tendency to collect moisture and dampness in the house. And in that little house, the dampness froze on the wall, so that it was a terrible winter, and there was plenty of dampness in the house, and there was ice as thick as the 1-inch wood that was around the windows, that went from the windows all the way up to the ceiling. And I was miserable. And So we had found another place to live by the next year.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Where would you attend elementary school?
where did I attend?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first year that we were here, when we lived in that White House over there on Knobloch Street, I went to Eugene Field. And there's quite a story to that too, because my mother was teaching at Jefferson, and we were just across around the corner or something from what would have been the Jefferson district. But no, they had to follow every direction about where children lived and what school they went to. And so I had to go to Eugene Field, and I had to walk by myself, and it was kind of a long walk. And I went down Knobloch Street, and there was a family who lived down there almost to where the fire station is now, lived across the street. And they had two boys, just a bit older than I, and the father was a faculty member, and I don't remember what the mother did other than not be at home when she probably should have been. But anyway, those boys just pestered the life out of me when I walked down Knobloch Street. And I decided that I didn't have to put up with that. I would just walk across the campus. And by doing that, I became acquainted with President Bennett's two younger children. The two younger children were twins, a boy and a girl. And they saw what those other boys were doing, chasing me and pestering me, and they decided that wasn't going to happen. So I walked on just happy as could be to have a fun walk. And usually the twins were walking with me, and we enjoyed Eugene Field as a school. You know what is on the ground where Eugene Field used to be now?
Is it the IGA?
It is.
Mm-hmm.
It is, exactly.
And did you go there your entire elementary school?
No, because they didn't serve lunches at school.
Oh.
So my mother decided that we would find another place to live that would be in Jefferson District, and we only lived there on Knobloch Street for the rest of that spring term, and then moved down to a little house on North Main Street in over here. And that way we were both going to the same school, and she could see to it that I had lunch, and you know that. They didn't have lunchrooms at school in that year anyway. I don't know how many more years before they had lunchrooms at school, but anyway.
Do you have any fond memories of your time at Jefferson School?
Of my what at Jefferson?
Attending Jefferson School?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. Because it was, I don't know if you were ever in Stillwater when the old building of Jefferson was there.
No.
No? Okay. Well, it was a big old red brick 2-story building and had big tunnel-like things, one on each side of the upstairs, and those were the fire escapes. So, and we kids just thought it was absolutely wonderful to climb up those tubes and turn around and sit down and slide down them. And also we had that whole big block for playground, and they had a ball game of one kind in one corner and another kind in another corner and another kind in another corner. And besides that, as long as I was going to Jefferson School, they always had a woman who was principal of the school. And it seemed to me that women principals were more likely to be out walking around on the playground and didn't hesitate to help children understand that there were certain things they didn't do on the playground. So playground was fun at Jefferson School. And also, because my mother was teaching there, why, I was kind of special to all the other teachers who were there.
Mm-hmm.
So I could, you know, had a pretty easy life right at that time.
Mm-hmm. Well, where did you go after Jefferson?
Junior high school.
Okay. And what was that like for you?
Just fine.
Mm-hmm.
I liked it because it was the first time we went to classes. Each different class in a different room and different hour, and and we got up and changed to a different room for a different class every hour, so that I didn't have to sit still in the for a whole day or half a day or whatever. And by that time, I'd had a great growth spurt. And when I was in the 7th grade, first year in junior high school, I could walk out in the hallway when we changed classes, and I could look over the heads of every boy in that school because I had grown so tall so quickly.
Hmm.
And it was, and we never had any problems with sizes or anything. In junior high school, the teachers and the administrators kept a pretty close eye on things, and school children at that time, I think, heard lectures from their own parents, and also they had teachers who were able to tell the youngsters what they were expected to do in that class,
Mm-hmm.
and they were expected to do it. And because we had no playground at junior high school, so we had to sit still a good part of the day.
For high school, did you attend the old Stillwater High?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Tell me a little bit about high school.
Well, it was in an old building, and I like old buildings, and I enjoyed being there. And they had a different schedule. Every hour you went to a different class, and I got into classes that school was easy for me, and I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed all the teachers that I had, and we just kind of had a good time and good friends, and
Were you involved in any activities?
well, I said I played the violin in the orchestra. Believe me, it wasn't true. I could do this, but I couldn't. I was not very musically inclined, and I was not able to sing a note, so I didn't do anything like that. But we did have some other things that gave us a chance to be in kind of a contest with other students, and I found that I was learned to be a very good typist, and also I could take shorthand and transcribe it, and some of that thing, and I was proud of what I could do there because, well, I know the first summer after I had typing 2 years, and I know it was well, no, I don't know. It was either the summer after my first year of typing in shorthand or the next summer. But anyway, I know that a family had a business where they prepared deeds for to go in the courthouse. Mm-hmm. And one of the rules for a deed, I didn't know before that, was that it has to be typed originally, no erasure.
Wow.
No, if there was a mistake made, tear it up and start all over again. So anyway, the one family who had that business called the people who were there in the typing and shorthand area and said, "Do you have anybody who can help us out?" And the teacher, the typing teacher, said, well, I know only one, and her name is Frances Ireland. And if you tell her she's the only one I know who can look at one letter and have the right finger hit the right key on the typewriter, and it's good to go. And so I worked for them the whole summer and earned some money. I was so proud of myself.
Was that your first job?
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Well, did you always think you were going to go to college?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I may not have thought it, but my mother did. And I realized that she was, well, she never would have twisted my arm if I said I wasn't going to go. But she told me all about the things that she got to do in college. And that first summer after we moved down here, we lived here a year, she had to take a 3-hour course at the college in order to get her Kansas certificate recognized for her as one that she could teach on until she finished getting the requirements for an Oklahoma certificate. And she decided that first summer that we were here, lived over there on Miller Street, around the corner in a duplex. The backyard of the duplex and the backyard of that white house that I was telling you about just met like this. And anyway, so we were right close to the campus there, and my mother decided that she didn't really know enough about food and what would be the best thing for us to eat and stay healthy that way. And and she didn't have anything to, she had enrolled in a class that lasted 3 hours every morning. And she didn't have anything else in the world to do with me. So she asked the woman who was a doctor, had a doctor's degree from University of Minnesota, very well-known researcher who had come down here to teach this special class. And she asked this woman, would it be possible if I sit on the front row, if my 7-year-old could sit beside me? Well, evidently that didn't bother the women, so I got all the lectures about how I had to sit there absolutely still and don't even wiggle my toes. And anyway, I sat there and I soaked up the thing that woman who was teaching was an absolutely wonderful teacher, because she had all the college students like this too, and I was like that too, and it hadn't been so long ago when I was remembering something that I heard in one of those classes. And so that was all the more, my mother, said, okay, see, you can go to college, and you are going to go to college because that's the only way you can get a job that you will fit for or will fit you. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay.
What year did you graduate high school?
39.
39. And then what colleges were you looking at?
OSU.
Okay.
We didn't have the money for me to go anyplace else, because living right here and usually within walking distance of the campus and all, why, my mother's salary would keep us going and also pay for my expenses to get into college. And there was no way that I could go off to another place. They didn't have so many scholarships around here, there, and everywhere then.
What were you interested in majoring in?
Like some other kids who weren't really old enough to start to college, I didn't really know. But let's see, I guess the very first year, you'll get all the standard English and whatever requirements but I remember thinking, well, I already know enough to be a good secretary. So I am going to go in and get more training in office machines and all this time kind of thing. So I got my first degree in, actually it was under the College of Business with a degree on a degree in office administration, and that was just fine, except that I don't remember exactly any particular reason that I decided there were plenty of secretarial jobs around here that I could get. I wasn't going to move off any place and leave my mother here by herself. And so we were still living together, and but I was getting tired of all that stuff by that time. And I was at least part of the time saying, I'm going to leave school and go do something else. Well, it scared my mother to pieces. She thought, what if she means it? And so as a first grade teacher, my mother tried to get acquainted with not only the children in her room, and she had about 40 of them, but also their families. And one family that she got well acquainted with and enjoyed so much, the father was the head of the foreign language department on campus. And they had a daughter and then some younger children in the same age group as I. And I know they invited us to come out to their house to have Thanksgiving dinner, and they lived right down here on Stallard. The house is still there. But anyway, I overheard my mother telling them that she didn't know what in the world she was going to do with me, because she thought I was getting whatever, that I was going to have trouble staying in college. And Dr. Arnold, who was the head of the foreign language department, said, well, Leela, let's talk about that a little bit. You know, I bet if we would reorganize her schedule for spring term, we might be able to find some classes that she would thoroughly enjoy, and maybe that would give her a chance to think about something else. Well, you know, it did. And I found out that I loved Spanish. So I really got a degree with a major in office administration and a minor in Spanish. And that has served me very well over a lot of years. I've lost all the Spanish that I really knew, but it was very easy for me. And I don't know exactly why, but my mouth let me make the sounds that you need in Spanish too, like
Uh-huh.
You
Yep.
can't do that unless you're born doing it. Well, I don't know that I was born doing it, but I sure learned to do it early.
What year did you graduate from Oklahoma A&M?
1940. I graduated from high school in 1939, and so I think it was 1944 when I got a bachelor's degree.
Okay.
It took the whole 5 years. And then I stayed and got a master's degree in 5 more years.
Did you go right into the master's program, or did you take some time off?
No.
And so,
I still like school.
and what area were you studying for your master's?
Well, I'll have to stop and think about that. That's kind of, well, I guess that's when I got into family relations and child development.
And so how did that come about? I mean...
Well, I'll tell you. By that time, I was back here in Stillwater with 3 rascally little boys.
Okay.
Okay? I'd been out little ways, in little time in between and all. But anyway, Dr. Stapley, who was head of the Family Relations and Child Development Department, came up in serious need of a nursery school teacher. And for whatever reason, she decided to ask me if I would be interested in interviewing for a job as a nursery school teacher. And, you know, this kind of got me up here. I thought, you know, I don't have that in my background. And then I got to thinking, and I had thought over the years since then, yes, that lady had seen me with 3 rascally little boys that would just climb the wall if you gave them a chance. And she knew that the kind of teacher that my mother was, and she figured that was as good a background as she could find on anybody that particular year, and she'd just make a gamble with it. Well, she gave me the 2-year-olds. Well, how can you miss if you've had 3 like that at home and have a place with all kinds of toys every place in a big yard and all kinds of things to do? You know, how can you miss having those? I think I had 8 children, 8 2-year-olds in there, and you know, we had a ball.
Well, let's back up for a second and tell me how you met your husband.
Well, that was the time when the United America was in a war, and it's been long enough ago, and it's been out of my mind long enough. I can't tell you all the details about that, but so many of the all the guys who were on campus, you know, were realizing they were going to go into the Army and all of this. And the Army was getting groups put together and sending them to different schools or colleges around the country to give them specialized training, and all because they didn't have enough places to put them on their regular Army bases. And the year that I was, I guess I must have been a junior in working on a master's degree, because 2 years, and then in another 2 years I graduated with a master's degree. And anyway, they sent a whole great big group of these guys who had been drafted into the Army, and they had the highest scores on the entrance exams that all of them had to take at that time. And they were sent to OU and here also, and they were supposed to learn some pretty stiff things like math and all that kind of thing. And so it became the intention of all the sororities around to have parties and invite these guys to their houses to have a little social life and whatnot. And several of us started dating regularly, some of the guys in this one group. And it ended up that within a year after that, I was married to one of them. So he had been sent away from here, so we had about 6 months of good getting acquainted here. And then he was sent to Johns Hopkins University. He went to high school in South Chicago.
Okay. Wow.
He got to the school, Johns Hopkins University, and he was expected to get into the things that they were teaching at sophomore level in college. And anyway, we didn't realize what all that was going to bring, but anyway, we decided we were going to get married, and we kept in touch, telephone, letters, all this kind of thing, you know. And so the ultimate thing was that he was going to have to stay there in Baltimore, and we decided that I was going to go back there and we were going to get married in Baltimore, which we did in the Lutheran church right downtown. And so at that point, he decided he couldn't deal with that program that he got put in either. And so they sent a whole, and he wasn't the only one, they sent a whole big crew of the guys all together that had been kind of together over to France. And they were in France for, I don't remember how long, it was quite a while. And when he got over in France, he was put in airborne. Now, that doesn't really mean the same thing that we thought it was then, but it was just that he was an infantry person, but he didn't go marching around. He had to get into a glider, and they pulled the gliders where they were going to get this whole group of guys were all in there with their weapons. And they'd get pulled in, and then they'd turn the glider loose, and it would go in and settle down. And then their job was to scramble out of that glider and go get after whatever other soldiers were there. Yeah, well, anyway, that really was not a very good fit either. So I decided that I needed to come back to Stillwater and get things organized a little better than we were getting them organized out there. And he spent, I guess, 2.5 or 3 years in Europe before he got out of the Army. And then when he first got out, he came back here, but he didn't fit in Stillwater any better than I fitted in South Chicago or any of those other places. And he was in an automobile accident within just a few months after he got out of the Army. So none of the boys remember seeing him. As a matter of fact, I think Stan, the oldest one, might have vague recollections, but the other two wouldn't have. And so they grew up with 2 parents in their family, 2 women parents, and both of them school teachers.
Was your mom just tickled that you started teaching?
Oh, yes. Well, she was tickled that I found a job here in Stillwater, and she was tickled that I was still here. And then after all this happened with Lee's getting the situation that he got put into, she was glad that he got out of that too, because I know that he told us that he had sat in a glider with his weapons all morning one day, waiting to be towed away and then turned loose and put down. And he said that was as hard a thing as he ever had to do. But anyway,
So your you're in Stillwater and you're doing the 2-year-olds. You're teaching the 2-year-olds in Stillwater.
Right.
Are you teaching them at a facility on campus?
In the lab school.
In the lab school. So I want you to kind of describe the lab school for me back then.
Well, it was half of the first floor of the old home economics building, which had been built back in the, 1920s or teens or something. And we had, the lab school had 2 playrooms, one for the older children and one for the little folks, like the 2-year-olds. And then we had that big, beautiful yard out behind the building. And it was always kept mowed and trimmed to very well. It was a beautiful yard, and the children loved playing in it. And we had a kitchen there, and Mrs. Bennett was our cook. And she cooked wonderful lunches for all of us. And the children, I think many of the children came to nursery school because she'd heard how good the lunches were, and they all looked forward to lunch. I mean, they didn't have to learn to eat different food. Whatever Mrs. Bennett cooked was delicious. And so we had morning and afternoon programs in both of those rooms. No all-day ones.
Mm-hmm. And did you stay with the 2s, or did you get moved to other levels as time went on?
Well, I was only there really 1 year, and a woman who'd been one of my advisors when I got my master's degree, which I had by that time, had gone back to her home in Colorado, and then she had taken a job at the University of Arizona as head of home economics. University of Arizona was a land-grant school and had the same arrangement as any other land-grant school at that time had. And if it was a home economics school, it was under the College of Agriculture. And so Ruth called me and said, "Frances, I'm desperate. We have a child development lab here, and we can't leave it sitting empty. We need to do something about it, and I do not have anybody who looks like even a possible teacher. I need you." This was in August, and by that time I decided I'd just as soon get into a different situation too. Not that anything was bad, but several things were such that I was ready to kind of make a change. And she said, "Now, Frances, I have to tell you, I don't have any money for travel, to pay your travel expenses." I said, "Oh, Ruth, I can buy a ticket on the Greyhound bus," which I did to go to Tucson. And now that's another story coming up when you want to hear that. But anyway, I went out and she showed me their building, and it was a lovely building and a beautiful yard, and hired a cook and all of that. And I thought, and I think I only had to teach one class besides I did have both morning and afternoon groups at nursery school, but the afternoon groups were so near kindergarten that they didn't need a lot of leading around to do this, that, or the other thing. But
did you have your PhD then? Then?
No,
okay.
That was my master's degree.
Okay.
It was, my PhD is coming up. Do you want to hear that now?
Well, how long were you in Arizona?
Well, I'd have to figure that out, but anyway, I was I was given a job out there as the director of the lab school, and I can't tell you, it was several years, 3 or 4 or 5 years that I was there in that position, and then as I told you, I did have the great, wonderful thing of getting a Danforth teacher grant, which paid me so that I got a PhD in 2 years by going back to Tallahassee. And that only happened because the man who'd been my advisor when I worked on my master's was then back at Tallahassee, and he was calling me, come back here, we need somebody back here, come back here, I'll be your advisor, we'll get you through. I mean, it's just unbelievable how things like that happen, you know. But are you ready to hear how the next step?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I got out to Tucson and went. Of course, I had gotten in there on the Greyhound bus, and so I was staying with Ruth, the woman who was now head of home economics, and she'd taken me into campus and into her office, and she said, "Well, now you know, Dean Myers is the Dean of Agriculture, just like it was in Stillwater, Ag Dean, Home Economics Dean also," and she said, he wants to see everybody who's going to be on his faculty, and so I have an appointment for us to go over and meet him. I said, well, that's all right. I've met deans before, and I don't mind. Let's go. So we did. Went into the dean's office, and he got up and greeted me, and he said, well, now, I'd like to know a little something about the families of the people who come to work for me. And I said, well, my mother and I have been the ones in our family, along with some cousins and whatnot. Well, no, he said, where did they live? Where did your family come from? I said, northeastern Kansas. He came up in his chair like this, and he looked at me, and he said, where in northeastern Kansas? I said, oh, Nemaha County. Well, he was even more than this. And he sat there and he looked at me, and he looked at me, and he looked at me, and I thought, oh, dear heaven, what did I say that was wrong? What was wrong with that answer? He said, was your mother's name Leela or Lenora? Well, by that time, at that point, I could have fallen flat on my face off on the floor, because how in the world would a man that I had just met in a dean's office at the University of Arizona take a good staring look at me and ask me what my mother's first name was? Well, come to find out, then, he said, well, I'm going to tell you that your Uncle Earl and I were very best friends the whole time that we went to country school, and during the time that we were in high school and had to go to town to high school. You know, I couldn't even breathe. I couldn't even breathe. And so from then on, he just kind of adopted me. And his wife decided she was going to adopt me too. And he couldn't do enough things to be helpful to me. And I think that was because he knew what a hard time my mother's family had had, and was appreciative of how all of them had turned out to be very good people. Two of my mother's brothers learned how to make radios. This was before you could buy them. And they went into making radios by hand and a lot of things like that. That, you know, they were smart as well as very upstanding kind of people. And anyway, he could tell that I was just, you know, like this about it. But as long as I was out there, he just never could do enough to help me. And I know that not too long after that first year that I was out there, I looked up from my desk. Well, I think it was the first year, maybe the next year. I looked up at my desk, and here was Dean Myers at my office door. I thought, oh boy, and I saw he had a great big white envelope in his arm. And I said, well, come on in and sit down. I always had a chair by my desk. And I said, please sit down. Well, he flapped that thing down, that big envelope down on the desk and said, I want you to apply for this. Yes, sir. He said, now there's not much time left because there was just a few weeks to get all the papers together and get them in. I said, well, I'll work on it as best I can. Okay. He said, I won't stay to visit with you, then just get after it. And I did. And I think I had just 3 weeks to get all the papers together and sent in and whatnot. And I got word that they had something like over 400 people had applied for those. And if you're acquainted with those, you know that Danforth had enough money that anytime they were going to offer something, everybody in the world would try to get in and get in line to get some of it. But anyway, they told me that over 400 had applied. More than 400 had been selected to go to Los Angeles for personal interviews. And they were paying the expenses, so I thought, sure, I'll go. That's fine with me. I like a trip to Los Angeles every now and again. I was given word that a little over 400 people had been selected for interviewing, and I don't know how many of the 400 went to Los Angeles, but anyway, that's where I was asked to go. And there were 73 out of that 400 who were, over 400, who were selected to get those marvelous scholarships. And lo and behold, guess whose name was on that list? And I never dreamed that I would ever get that kind of help about getting a PhD. And sure enough, I think I mentioned that the man who was my advisor for my thesis at my master's degree had gone to Tallahassee, to Florida State, and he was urging me to come back there, and they had an opening. Can you imagine that? And so off I went, and I knew several of them because we'd gone to national meetings, and it wasn't that I was going into a bunch of people who didn't know me and didn't know what kind of programs I could do for them and what I had taught and all of that kind of thing. And so I was lucky enough to, I don't know how anybody else could be as lucky to have that kind of help to get through a PhD in 2 years, and especially with the fact that we had to move a few thousand miles across the country. And my mother and all 3 of my children went with me, and we had to find a house to live in and help the boys get into school. Well, they were very, adaptable. They lived in where they went to different schools too, and whatnot. And they were old enough by that time that they could pretty well take care of themselves, and they grew to be immense, so they didn't have too big a problem taking care of themselves. When you're in junior high school and well above 6 feet tall, and all you can have a little more respect than some other people get.
Did you have to do any time in the lab school in Tallahassee?
Did I have to? No.
No.
No, because a PhD is based completely on observational research, really, really focused on a particular thing. And if you get into doing anything in a lab school, it's very difficult to get a lab school that will make room for you to do anything. And it's one of the problems also is that parents are not too keen about having their children in a project that might have some impact on the child and that kind of thing. And so...
well, tell me about your PhD research.
Oh, well, let me think now what I can say about it. Actually, it was more or less based on what children do in certain situations at home, and about what kind of relationships the children and their parents have in getting them to agree about certain things, so that life at home is a little more pleasant than for some people than it is for other people. And the parents filled out a good number of questionnaires for me, and we had to do quite a lot of data gathering and analyzing and whatnot. So I think of course one of the requirements was getting it published, which we did, but I doubt anybody has read even the first publication. So I always thought it was just one of those little jobs that they said, well, this is what you have to do. You don't have to make a mark in the world. You just have to do this job.
Well, after Tallahassee, what happened? Where did life take you next?
Right back to Tucson.
Okay.
All of us were so glad to get back to the hot weather, the hot, dry weather. We had left a house out there. I purchased a house, and we rented that house while we were gone, to somebody else. And we were so anxious to get back to that house and get into the neighborhood where the boys had friends. There were a lot of other families with children in that neighborhood, and they liked the schools that they had in Tucson, and so we were all eager to get back there.
And so at this point, are you teaching on the faculty at the University of Arizona?
Yes. Some graduate level courses. And I believe that after the first year I was back, that they got somebody else who would be in charge of the lab school, that I couldn't do all of that teaching that classes at that level and keeping things going at the lab school. And I didn't stay very long. That's when they called from here and said, come back, come back.
Well, I was going to ask how you got back to Stillwater.
Well, I had a few phone calls. Come back here, help us out. We need you. And they were people I knew and who knew me, and so I thought, well, I think they're telling the truth if they say we need you, because I kind of knew what they needed.
Mm-hmm.
But see, by that time I could teach graduate level classes, and that's what I did. I had some responsibilities to the lab school, but mostly teaching graduate level classes. I think I was only here 2 or 3 years before I was, the last 2 or 3 years that I was, before I retired.
Mm-hmm. So you came back to OSU in 19...
Who knows? I'll have to look that up for you. I can't, I know, well, I'll tell you, I do know that all of us got back to Stillwater in 1963.
Okay.
Now that is right, I know that.
Mm-hmm.
And, but there was just so many things that I was having to remember related to time, dates, places, and all that kind of thing. And I had so much in my mind, and I tell you what, getting a PhD in 2 years was a thing I don't want to do ever again.
That's quite a feat.
So,
So coming back to Stillwater, tell me about the people in the department. Who's the department head? Who's the dean? What's going on?
well, Dean O'Toole was still the dean at that time, and the department head was Mrs. Stapley, and so I knew all of them, and it wasn't hard to fit back in the program since I'd been a student, a teacher, an administrator, and how I had all these other experiences. You know, I could fit in pretty well. And besides that, by the time we got back here, my boys were near enough being grown up that I didn't have to be paying attention to what they were doing and all at that time. And my mother was still well at that time. Later on, she had several years of needing help. She couldn't live alone for several years toward the end of her life. Now, she lived to be 95 years old, but, or 98. She lived to be 98.
Well, tell me a little bit about Dean O'Toole.
Some people thought, I think some people were very anxious about living up to what they thought were her expectations, that she was not an easygoing, talkative kind of person like I am. But I always found her very pleasant to deal with, and never had any problems. I got to all meetings and got to meetings on time, and I got my reports in. So that's kind of helpful, you know, when faculty members do that for the dean.
How did the facilities change through the years over in home economics?
Well, they changed enough. See, they'd gone to the new building by the time I came back, and to me it was never the same. They had the lab school and all over in the out back of the new building, and I don't remember what all they'd put in the area that had been the lab school's location in the old building, and they tore the old building down before very long after that, and so it was just going into a different place.
Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about some of the different courses you taught.
Oh, I can't believe that. I'll tell you what, I didn't teach the same ones both semesters every year. I had different ones. I had to study as hard as the students did for a good many of them, because at that time was the time that there was so much financial problem in the country, and there were so many I can't say organizations, but government groups that had been established to help people who needed help to do this, that, and the other thing. And so many of those things that folks needed help with had to do with families with young children who did not have sufficient income to take care of all of them. And so there were a lot of things that we had to learn that were purely sociology.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was kind of neat that I had a minor in sociology too, but for my at my bachelor's level. But anyway, it and we didn't teach the same classes every year, so that students could go through almost the whole 3 year. You know, first year in school, it's just general courses that everybody has to take.
Mm-hmm.
But then after that, there's kind of a setup of courses that each department teaches every year. And so I got into being with a department where I got to teach several of those departments, several of those classes in that department that I had taught before, and that made it a little easier than having to teach 3 new ones every semester.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's tough to do a new prep every semester.
Yeah, it's kind of fun though, because you can get interested in the new things and get in the library and find all kinds of things you didn't know were there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the time also when there were so many federal programs that were being distributed to states all around. And I think all the schools that I knew were teaching classes relating to some of these federal programs that were developed to try to help children with families with children.
Mm-hmm. Like Head Start. Like Head Start?
Well, yeah, that was part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh. We had Head Start then.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point did you end up department head? How did that come about? Did you just volunteer one day and said, I'll do it?
No, I'd have to think about this for a minute. Give me a minute to think about this. When I can't tell you for sure, because I don't think I came back from Arizona to be department head. As a matter of fact, I know I didn't. But Mrs. Stapley was going to be old enough to retire within the next 2 or 3 years. Now it's beginning to come back to me. And so the college and the university began advertising for somebody to come in to have the qualifications to be department head. And I cannot imagine how much money some department's budget put into paying travel expenses for all the people that they invited to come in. And this went on for a year. And late in the spring, I was sitting at my desk, and the Dean Crabtree called and said, "Frances, I need to see you." "Well, I'm here." "All right, I'll be right in." She came in. I don't know if you ever knew her, probably not. She was like this, going. And she came into my office that way and sat down, and she said, "All right, I have something to talk to you about." "Well, yes, ma'am." Said, "Will you agree to be considered as for the position of department head?" I nearly fell off my chair. I said, "Oh, come on. That's not, what I am best fitted for." She said, "I don't care whether you're best fitted for it or not. I've been talking with your faculty, and I mentioned to them how many people, I don't remember how many people had been brought in to interview, how many people had come in, and I just said to them, all right, you folks have said no to me for everybody who's come in. Now you tell me what we're going to do. And she said the answer was, we're going to ask Frances Stromberg to be head of the department. You know, I was just swamped. I just absolutely speechless. And I said, oh. She said, Frances, we need you. And said, if you'll just do it for a while, why, help us see what we can do. But I did it until I retired, which was only about 3 years, I think.
Uh-huh.
And so, anyway, but, I knew all the people on the faculty. Excuse me. I knew all the people on the faculty, mm-hmm. and we'd all work together. Mm-hmm. And when you're all teachers in the same general area, and you've known each other for a number of years, you work together very well ordinarily. Mm-hmm. And I'm not too hard to get along with, and we usually could figure out something, and so I, with a little arm twisting, I agreed that I would do that for a year or so anyway, but it lasted a little longer than that.
Throughout your time teaching here at OSU, what were some of the major shifts you saw in terms of how you taught students, the curriculum?
Well, my feeling about that is, in view of the fact that I taught the very first classes and first in the nursery school quite a long time ago, and most of us in our department and in most other departments that I knew relied on textbooks that were published, readily available, and but by the time, as a basis for whatever class, we'd have a different textbook for every class, but anyway, that there was published material already that was accepted and served as a basis for the course material. But by the time I retired, of course I was in the office. I didn't have to deal with that planning coursework for classes the last few years that I taught. And by that time, everybody was going to research journals and putting together their information that they wanted to use and in a way they wanted to use it, and all, so that students didn't have to hear the same story over and over again, or have cousins who went to that same class and had all the papers for them, or something like that. So it was I think a much better learning situation for students by the time I mean students all over the whole campus. I don't mean just in our department.
Mm-hmm. And within your department, was there a big focus on the faculty to publish or obtain grants?
Yes.
Or
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I couldn't even get a PhD unless I already had my dissertation on the way to being published. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of nice to have friends along the way. So you know where to go, where you can find a place that would be accepting of what work you've been doing.
Mm-hmm. Would you have to work with other departments on campus, such as agriculture or the home demonstration agents? I know the name has changed through the years. Now it's cooperative extension.
Well, now see, we had the demonstration, the what do they call them now?
Cooperative extension educators. The name keeps changing.
Yeah, extension, right. Mm-hmm. And of course, we always worked with extension folks, but during the whole time that I was department head, it was part of my salary came from extension, and it was my responsibility to go to the quarterly meetings for every area in the state. And I'll tell you what, I grew to weigh 137 pounds. Oh, those ladies can cook such good food.
At these meetings, what would you talk about? Or are you just going to listen?
Well, I just went because it was my responsibility to be there.
Okay.
And I got to choose what I went wherever I wanted to go, and didn't have any responsibility to do a program when I got back about what I'd heard or anything like that. It was just that Mother Hen was kind of going along with the chickens.
Through the years, home economics has changed their name. We went from home economics to human environmental science to now, what is it, human sciences? How do you feel about the name changes through the years?
Well, probably a good thing. Because home economics was really a very limiting title for a program as wide as the one we had here. And I think over the years it would have limited the expansion of the program and made it harder for the program to be teaching things that were being accepted in the area at that time. And times when you have little children and grown-ups attitudes and the government getting into all kinds of things that had to do with family and young folks and all that kind of thing, you needed elbow room to be able to change things. You couldn't be locked into the information that had been taught in one particular area in the same way for years and years and years, which is what I think it would have become if the name hadn't changed.
What's been the best part of the job for you?
Getting to know the other teachers, the people. I think, I respected all those folks. They were well educated. They were nice, pleasant. They were nice to work with. And I knew that in some other departments, some of the times the faculties didn't quite get along that well. But I tell you, as long as I was in that department, we never had faculty members who made problems for each other. And there were several different department heads, so I wasn't the one who did that. But we were kind of nice folks, and we were nice to each other.
Do you hear back from your former students?
Sometimes once in a while, yeah. As a matter of fact, we had a funeral here early, mid-spring, I guess it was, of one of our faculty members. And she had been one of my students, too, one of my very favorite students. She was just a fine person, and she died unexpectedly. And I was so interested that so many of her students came to the funeral, but they also came and told me, I was there at the funeral, and they came and told me how glad they were to see me and that kind of thing, whether I had been one of their teachers or not. And so, it made me feel good.
Well, looking back on your career, what are some highlights that just really stick out for you in your mind. Career highlights.
Well, I have to say that I did not have a long-term goal in my mind when I first started to college that I knew was going to still be there 20 or 30 years from then. But my mind was open, and sure enough, there were things that happened, and I got to take classes in different areas, and I found I was always excited about learning something new, and that meant that I met different people as well as different subject matter, and I never got bored with what I was learning about. Mm-hmm. So, if over all those years
well, looking back on your work, what legacy do you hope to leave when people remember Frances? What do you hope people remember about you?
Well, I'm not sure how to put this, but I hope they will remember that I did a fairly good job of every job I was given, and we all worked together pleasantly and productively and enjoyed it, and I thought it was a wonderful opportunity for me to have faculty members I worked with when I was a teacher and when I was department head, that we all could get together and have such a good time. We liked each other, and I think we all did a good job in our particular position.
What, was it a hard decision to decide, okay, now I'm going to retire, or were you ready?
I tell you, I was either going to have to put my mother in a care facility, mm-hmm. or I was going to have to retire, because she, living to be as old as she was, some things up here kind of went the way that they do for a lot of us as we get older. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't, I'd gotten to the point where I knew I could no longer leave her at home and alone, and I didn't know anyone I could get who would be one that she would accept and would be able to come and live here with her, because when you're department head, you're just about working 12 or 15 hours a day mm-hmm. away from house, and I know that it bothered me, because I knew once she thought she better answer the telephone every time it rang, and then they would ask for me, and a time or two I was here and heard her in a very cross voice respond to them. Well, don't you know where she is? She's at work, you know, something like that. And I couldn't have that, because the calls were ones that were reasonable calls, and I needed to be able to take care of them, and I couldn't take care of them when I found out that that was the way some of the phone calls were being answered, and all of that. And besides that, her just general health was going down. Mm-hmm. I think she went from a fairly active person to almost a bedridden person in a matter of about 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I could see all the clues coming on, and I knew that she was going to have to go into a care facility, and I knew she would not be happy about that, at least for the first while. And I wouldn't be happy about it either, and so fortunately, we found a place that was what, it has Head Start and I don't know what else, across the street from the fire station down there on South Main. Well, there was a very nice daycare facility down there a long time ago. And she lived down there, I think, 4 years, and never complained about it. And I went to visit her as often as I could, and maybe not every day, but almost every day. And I was able to see how she interacted to the teenagers who were hired as caregivers down there. And she just bloomed when one of those kids came up to the door and greeted her and began to visit with her. You know, she just came up and bloomed and chatted and all with them until they were happy and she was happy to see them. And I never ever had one complaint about one of them not being nice to her.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, a lot of people did complain that the older people who were not able to defend themselves didn't do very well in a good many of those daycare facilities. But she never complained that anybody down there did anything but take good care of her. And I know that she'd sit up and she'd see them, and very often she'd call these were kids 18, 19 years old, you know, or maybe 17, probably not, or early 20s. And she knew several of them by name, and she'd sit up and call them by name when they came to her door. Well, of course, that just pleased them no end. And it pleased her no end that they would do so many things for her. So,
well, you two had a very special bond.
I did have a very special mother, very special. And when I thought about I still think about how she had to do so many things that must have been very hard for a girl child or a young woman to have to deal with. And yet she grew to be well up into her 90s, and she was still just so glad to see these kids who came to her door.
Mm-hmm.
And they beamed back at her just the way as she beamed to them.
Well, I'm sure she was very proud of the work you were doing as well.
Well, probably. Probably.
Well, before we close out, tell me a little bit about your children.
About my children?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have 3 boys, 3 sons, and Susan's husband is the oldest one, and Dave, who lives out in the country, was his assistant fire chief for a while, but then he had to retire. His back was injured. He was hauling hose on a ladder, and so he lives out in the country now. And then Jim has a master's degree from OSU. He got out of high school and didn't know what he was going to do, but he decided that he would go in the Navy. That was just at the time of the Vietnam War, and he signed up to go in the Navy. We were back in Tucson by that time, and he signed up for a 4-year hitch, and he was assigned to an old World War II destroyer that left San Diego, went to the Philippines, and then went to Vietnam, and it only came back to San Diego one time in that whole 4 years. Mm-hmm. And here he was. He had graduated from high school, but so had a good many of the boys on the ship, and so he developed some friends who are still his friends.
So what are you doing in retirement now these days? Are you enjoying retirement?
Oh, you bet. You bet. I can go wherever I want to go. I can read books when I want to read books. I can knit and crochet. I have 15 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
And every one of them has had a hand-knitted blanket that Memo made. And it's so much fun to see these children. They are so different because somehow or another, the boy's father didn't look like any big Scandinavian, even though he knew he had carried the name, Scandinavian name. But he was just 5 feet 9 inches tall and kind of an ordinary sized person. Well, his dad was even shorter than he was and very chunky. Pop Stromberg they had a moving and storage business, and Pop had such big hands where he lifted so many things he could not buy leather gloves that his hands would go into and all that. Well, when I began to see what size the first boy was, Susan grew up to be Susan's husband, and the other two coming along, and they were going to be just as bigger. Why, I thought, good grief. And so I asked my husband, I said, where did I can understand where you all got the blonde hair and the blue eyes, but I don't understand where you get this 6 feet 6 or so height. Well, he said, it wasn't from Pop, but Pop had a brother who was a fairly tall man, and he had a family of, I've forgotten how many sons, 5 or 6 or 7 or so, and every one of them was over 6 feet tall. So he said, you know, it's just in the family somehow or another. You either get it or you don't get it, and all of that. But anyway, good many of these big guys turned out to look like Vikings. Blonde hair, blue eyes, tall, big shoulders, and all of this, you know. So I'm kind of proud. And they all grew up to be very nice men. And I'm very pleased with them, and I think that my mother and I had a few things to do with that, but...
I'm sure you two did. Well, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close on out here today? Anything else you'd like to mention?
I've just about drained out, I think, everything that I...
But you've done great. Thank you so much for your time today.
Well, I've enjoyed having you here. As you can tell, you know, when I live by myself, and I've had as many friends and done as many things as I have in my life. I miss having company that I can visit with, and so it's been my pleasure to have you here.
It's been great. Thank you so much.